Um,
Okay.
Hi, I'm Kathy Green. I'm a retired band director um, for middle school students. I am an oboist, um, and there's, I believe, something in our DNA that makes all oboists perfectionists because I teach oboe lessons, and I'm constantly dealing with perfection issues in my students. I also do some teaching for the University of Iowa for the Bell and Blank Center. Adjunct. I live in near Chicago and not in Iowa. So my colleague here, Tom, I'll let you introduce yourself.
I'm Tom Greenspan. I'm a retired psychotherapist living in Minneapolis. I'm currently, though, in New Hampshire on a little trip. And through my 40 some odd years of practice in psychotherapy and my looking inside of myself in my own work, I've had many opportunities to come in contact with the issue of perfectionism. And I've written and spoken very extensively about that. Some of you in the audience tonight may have heard me speak at NAGC. I did that for several years. Um, and yeah, so it's been a long time interest of mine. And uh, and a long time issue to deal with. Let's put it that way.
Okay, tonight our presentation is basically the setup for the series that we're going to be putting on, that the Social Emotional Network is going to be putting on over the course of this school year. So this is an overview. So there's um, this is sort of a perfectionism 101 kind of situation where we want to give you some general information about it. And we'll see how far we get in 15 minutes. So um, um, first of all, the one thing to understand about researchers and psychologists is there are really two different camps on what perfection is and how it is maybe handled. Is that the right word I would use, Tom? And so some say that perfectionism exists on a continuum from healthy to unhealthy or normal to neurotic. Um, and others, I will let Tom talk about this.
Uh, Actually, the difference I think is between looking at perfectionism from the outside, which typically is done in research. So you try to classify the behaviors and the thoughts and the feelings that go along with it, and so on and so forth. And when you do that, and you end up noticing that some perfectionists are very successful, it becomes easy to apply a label like healthy perfectionism. But to me, the distinction is if you go inside, if you talk to perfectionistic people, if you find out what their actual lived experience is like, and again, this is something I can relate to personally as well as professionally, then you find an entirely different picture from the inside. Uh, People who hear that, well, there are some people who are perfectionistic, but actually not all the time, or it's okay to make a mistake once in a while, or something like that. Most perfectionistic people will tell you that's no perfectionist because of their own personal experience of all this. So to me, again, the difference is kind of inside and outside. And as we go along in this presentation, you'll see some more information about that. The last statement on this slide says perfectionism is a self-esteem issue. That is, and it's an attempt to cope with shame. We're going to be talking some more about that as the session goes on. But what we're going to see is that this is a very deep psychological issue that is very difficult to classify as healthy from the inside. And that's the point.
But as you just look further and further into research, and you're reading the research of various people, you will see some people that write on it and have the notion that there is a healthy perfectionism versus an
Mhm.
unhealthy perfectionism, whereas others will say that perfectionism is always unhealthy, and that if it's that you're not what truly a perfectionist if it is healthy, if it does seem
Well,
healthy.
yeah, yeah. I mean, what we're going to see as this goes on is that there's a distinction. I make a distinction, let's put it that way, between perfectionism and the pursuit of excellence. And there's a particular bright line that separates those two, and we'll talk about that as we go along here.
Okay. So there are three different types of perfectionism, according to some researchers. And they fall into the categories of self-oriented, other-oriented, and socially prescribed. The self-oriented is what's inside of you, the demands that you're putting on yourself. And it's as we said here, personally imposed high standards, not anything that anyone else has told you to do or expectations of other people. It's the expectations you have of yourself. Um, that contrasts to the socially prescribed, where there's the belief that others are holding you to an extremely high standard, that and everything that you do is judged based on those perceived standards. And in some cases, they're not, they may not be perceived, they may be actual standards that people are trying to make you live up to. But um, that is, that's the kind of where it's coming in from the opposite direction. Other oriented is a perfectionist that holds other people to high standards.
You know, and let me just say a few things about that too. This is Paul Hewitt and Gordon Flett's work.
Mhm.
Um, again, if you look from the inside, from the lived experience of a perfectionistic person, it becomes a little bit difficult to separate these three types of perfectionism. You have to ask the question: if you're a self-oriented perfectionist, where would the idea come from that you have to be perfect? You know, it's going to come from somewhere. It doesn't just occur in a vacuum. And it turns out that those are ideas that perfectionistic people get from particular relationships that they're in. So the distinction between self-oriented and socially prescribed starts to blur. And there are plenty of perfectionistic people who will tell you that when they're hard on other people, the reason they do that is because somehow it's occurred to them that if other people who are working with them don't do well, that's a reflection on them.
Mhm.
And so again, those lines get blurred.
Yeah. And teachers out there, you might see that type of thing happening in group projects where um, it seems very difficult for a person that is very perfectionistic to accept that their work is a joint effort, and they may drive others crazy with their expectations, but that's one way that you might see that play out in a school setting. um,
And I don't know, Kathy, if you want to make comments about the other sides of the
oh
slides
yes,
there.
yes.
Uh, but this is something that a former student and colleague of Alfred Adler's has said, that perfectionism is rampant today. And we do have this problem. And, in our particular society, there are certain standards that people feel that they have to live up to. This is especially true for standards for women, for standards for non-white people, uh, all kinds of standards that we have where people feel that there is a an ideal person to be in our culture. And what Adler and Dreikers were attempting to say was, we really need to think about that. And when we do have those kinds of standards in mind, it becomes emotionally dangerous for us. And what should be aiming for is what they call the courage to be imperfect. We'll talk more about that
Yeah.
also as we go on.
Yeah. Courage is very important. Um,
Yeah,
yeah, we do have a number of quotes from various people. We don't want to just read the slides, but um,
yeah.
we are, and if you have questions on anything, feel free to put something in the chat. It's being monitored for us. So um, now Adelson and Wilson, in their book over Letting Go of Perfect, Overcoming Perfectionism in Kids, um, divided perfectionists into 5 different types. So this is a little bit different grouping than what Hewitt and Flett did. And my apologies, I forgot to put their name on that last slide. um, what they did with the 3 different types of perfectionists. So an academic overachiever. So we've talked a little bit about those that um, if they're given um, a 2-page paper to write, they write a 6-page paper. They always do more than is necessary because they can't stop themselves from just doing what is required. Um, the aggravated accuracy assessor. In schools, those might be the kids that have the holes in their paper from erasing, erasing, because a certain letter isn't just ever so the way they wrote it, or a number is not lined up exactly the right way. So that's another type. A risk evader. That's someone who, for fear of making a mistake, will avoid trying new things. Um, Controlling image manager. Um, I need to always look like I am in control. I always need to look like I am doing the right thing. I know what I'm doing. And therefore, I have to control this persona and this image that I'm presenting to the world, thus making myself seem perfect in every single way. And there's so much more to this than we have time to go into. The book is wonderful. And then a procrastinating perfectionist. So this is the person that puts it off, puts it off because they can't either maybe get it out of their head because it's perfect the way they have it in their head, but they don't know how to get it out on paper. Um, or they just put it off because they are continually um, brainstorming and mulling it over. And then, oh, it's the last minute and I have to throw something on paper. So that means that, okay, I'm really not as good as I thought I was. And so that, that covers me because, I procrastinated, I get that, so it's not as good as it should be, but it never will be anyway. Um, so
Yeah, and some perfectionistic people will procrastinate because they're so afraid of a judgment coming.
yeah,
You know, they're convinced that this is not going to be good enough, and so forth, and so it's hard to even marshal the effort to get it done.
right. Right. And those, I think sometimes those are as a teachers, those are some of the kids that are the hardest to figure out because, you look at it from the perspective of, okay, they're just not turning in their work or they're not doing good work. They aren't spending the time. They need to work harder. And that's not necessarily it. They just don't, um, they're not able to put down everything that they think is going to be enough. And so they put it off um, because it will never be enough and they will never be enough. So it's just
If
one
I
of those.
can,
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
that's if I can just put something in here about that. if you're a teacher and you have a student of this sort, and you have the opportunity to do this, would be a great time to sit down with a student and say to them, I've noticed that it's difficult for you to get moving and get your work in and so forth. Can you give me some idea of what goes through your mind when you sit down to do these assignments? It'd be interesting to know what you're thinking about when you do this. And that may open the door to a conversation about what's actually happening, what they're actually afraid of, or what they're thinking about as they go to do a project. And that would be a great dialogue.
Yeah. I also had a dialogue with a student one time. It was, again, a procrastinating perfectionist, and for him, he knew what he wanted to do. It was all in his head. He had it figured out, but the idea of doing this entire project instantly, how his head saw it, how he saw it in his head, was more than he could bear, and he was in tears. He didn't know where to start. So for him, as intelligent as he was and capable as he was, he could not take it from the large to the small. So a lot of gifted kids, they have trouble when they're given things just in little pieces and they can't see the big picture. Well, the big picture is important to them, and he needed to see the big picture, but he also had to be taught how to start. He couldn't get it out of his mind. So I sat down with him, had a similar discussion to what Tom just said, and I said, well, why don't we take just this one piece? Just do this little bit for me right now. And he did that, and it's like the floodgates opened for him because he had to start somewhere, and he wasn't able to do that because he was so bound up inside. So those are just a couple of ways that these kinds of things can show up. Um, okay. Shame.
Mhm.
Um, so
Again, if you look from the inside to the lived experience of perfectionistic people, you'll find at the bottom of this, perfectionism is really a self-esteem issue, and it's based on shame. And shame has to do with the idea that somehow or another, if I make a mistake, it means that I'm defective in some way, and that means that I'm not acceptable to other people. And uh, the result of that is that a lot of fear of making mistakes and so forth, and fear of doing the wrong thing and all that, because you want to avoid these feelings of shame. And that's why I have said that here's the quote down here: perfectionism is understood as an abiding attempt to overcome shame, that sense of defectiveness, and conditional acceptability, the sense that I'm only okay as long as I am at a certain level of success, or do okay, or do what other people want me to do, or whatever it is. That's the only way that I'm okay. Um, that amounts to shame. That's what shame is about.
right. And when you are shamed like that, as it says under there, if I make a mistake, it means I'm not as good or as smart or as
Mhm.
capable as my teacher or my parents or my friends, or even I thought I was. So it builds in um, almost a way of I'm not coming up with the word I want. It builds in a like a bar for themselves that is lower than maybe they think it should be, or their teachers think that it should be. But I've made a mistake, so therefore I'm not up to this bar that you expect me to be at.
Mhm. I'm
It has,
defective in some way. Yeah,
yeah,
I'm not.
exactly. Exactly.
I'm not as good as I should be.
Mhm.
It's not good
Exactly.
enough.
So
Yeah.
so
Mhm.
okay.
And there's a great quote on the other side of the thing there. Basically,
Yes,
it's goes over the same thing.
right,
Perfectionism is a shield for shame. Yeah.
right. Yeah, and maintaining self-worth. And
Hmm.
and that goes back to that whoops, sorry, this one, the controlling image manager. That can be a big part of that also.
Hmm.
Okay. I love this quote by Brené Brown. When perfectionism is driving us, shame is riding shotgun, and fear is that annoying backseat driver. Because those are that's the reality of it right
Hmm.
there. Um,
Hmm.
um,
Yeah. And again, the fears that you have of making mistakes, or the fear about what people are going to think of you, and so forth, is grounded on the idea that you have this underlying sense that there is something wrong with you and you're not acceptable. That's shame.
oh yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And Maya Angelou, you know, they're going to find me out.
Mhm.
I've run a game on everyone. They're going to find me out. I'm
Yeah.
really not this good. I'm really not. I'm really not capable of this. So, all of these fearing failure, fearing somebody's going to find out that
Mhm.
you're human,
Yeah.
that we all fail, and it's going to happen. And and honestly, dealing with these things as in kids as young as you can is the best way to do it. If you're in a classroom, noticing these things when they're young, because then you can help them understand that these mistakes only help them improve, and it has nothing to do with who they are as a person. It's the process.
Yeah.
I'm a
I mean,
I'm a
just another comment about Maya Angelou and the what psychologists call the imposter syndrome. The
yes.
feeling that you're going to be found out, and so forth. This is another good example of the social context in which perfectionism occurs in our culture. Angelou, as a black writer, is being held to standards in our culture that are different than the standards historically that white authors and writers have been held to. And that is part of what drives a sense of perfectionism, and certainly a sense of being an imposter. So that's important to take into account when you're talking with a student who comes from a particular cultural background that may be minoritized in our culture. And the student may have the feeling that in some ways there may be no way that they can become perfect, because there's no way they can arrive at the perfect cultural standard.
Yeah. Okay. Um, yeah. Um,
This
so
is this is the distinction that I referred to earlier between uh, uh, striving for excellence and perfectionism. Um, and when perfectionist people are successful, which many times they are, what we come to understand, again, in looking at the underlying psychology of all this, it isn't the perfectionism. I tell people that if I could wave a magic wand and get rid of your perfectionism, it not only would it not affect your ability to be successful, if anything, the research shows, and this is psychological research from the outside again, that people in various fields of endeavor who are highly perfectionistic are actually less likely to be successful than people in exactly the same fields who are not quite as perfectionistic. Why? Because perfectionism represents such a level of anxiety about making mistakes that it ends up getting in your way.
mhm,
So it isn't the perfectionism that's making people successful, it's their talent, energy, and commitment. None of those things would go away if their perfectionism vanished.
yeah. On the right side of the slide, talking about, these are just some questions to think about when you're, if you're seeing certain characteristics in some of your students, and obviously you're not going to ask a second grader if their motivation is intrinsic or extrinsic, but there are ways you can do that, that will help them understand, help you understand where their thinking is. Why does this have to be done just ever so? Why do you have to keep erasing those numbers or those words? And that will give you some clues into what's going on with them, and where their anxiety and is coming from, and where their fear of making mistakes is coming from. So these are just a few things that I jotted jotted down for you to think about as you're working with kids. Um, we need to keep moving. So okay. Uh Okay, for some reason it does not want to. All right, let's try this. There we go. Okay. Procrastination can be a problem. And we talked a little bit about this earlier. And the procrastination, you may see it in kids that just need constant approval. They 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 can't do anything unless they're asking you, the teacher, is this right? Is this right? Is this right? Um, and then we talked about with the shame and not being good enough, imposter syndrome. But the the need for approval, that's a specific one that will show up in your class, and they may seem kind of annoying because they're always asking this, but let's take a step back and figure out why they're always doing that. And my guess is they have this fear of being a fraud or an imposter, and that they're questioning everything that they do. So when you're seeing those things, that's what you need to jump in and take note of that. Anything from you, Tom, on this one?
Yeah.
Okay. Um, and from from some from research and creativity, Calvin's got this all wrong. It's the starting of a project, um, and that's when things start moving along. As I was explaining with that one student of mine, he was paralyzed. He could not figure out how to begin. So once he did, then it's like it clicked in, the floodgates opened. He started, his creativity. You could just see the wheels turning in his head once he started. And if you're seeing students that just can't get started, what ends up happening is those are the kids that end up becoming, some of your underachievers. And we don't want that. So we don't want the last minute panic that Calvin seems to live by.
Yeah.
Um,
Again, if you want to have a conversation with your student about what you notice about how difficult it is for them to get started about something, and ask them, what goes on in their minds when they're thinking about starting a project, um, and listen to what they say, and then have a dialogue with them about that, not to tell them that they're wrong,
right.
because uh, that's going to cause its own problems. But to say, well, that's interesting. Let's talk about where you might have gotten that idea. Is that something that you've heard from someone? Do you think certain people have certain kinds of expectations for you? And ask them also if they think you have those expectations for them. Does it seem to you like, as your teacher, I expect you to do certain things in certain ways? And if they say yes, if they have the courage to say yes under the circumstances, that's a wonderful conversation to initiate with them.
Right. Yeah, that's the type of thing that they were talking about this with the socially prescribed perfectionism, Flett and Hewitt. Um, Also with that, I mean, these things can ultimately become very damaging and very troublesome. Um, a relative of mine ended up in, with anorexia as the result of believing that she could not meet other people's standards. And some of that stemmed from just comments like from her boyfriend or comments from other people that were not intended to be harmful, but she internalized them in a way that was very harmful. And
Yeah,
definitely,
sometimes eating disorders like that can be what gives a person a sense of internal control when
mhm,
it feels to them like they're being controlled from the outside by people's standards or their expectations or whatever it is. And again, some of those are cultural expectations, because some people who have eating disorders are trying to sculpt the perfect body, at least
right,
according to our culture standards.
right,
So.
right. Okay. I don't know why this, there we go. Um, I put this little slide on here with all the red and pink colors and such. Um, because if you looked at this, and if it would be really nice to want to line everything up very nicely, put everything in a box. But when you're paralyzed, it's like you can't get anything lined up. And the colors are all bleeding all over each other. This is the artist in me. Yeah. So this to me is a visual representation of what that paralysis feels like
Mhm.
for someone. Um, anyway, um,
Okay.
yeah. So, and I could go into some things about the arts versus a regular classroom and the way sometimes these words are thrown about. We don't have time for that, but they're in the arts and in athletics, there are there's the word perfect gets thrown around a lot. And there are levels of expectations that um, can be used positively, or they can be internalized and really seen as negative. And they're they're let's go on to what Yo-Yo Ma has to say.
Uh,
um,
Excellent. Yeah.
yeah.
That is
So
directly related here.
right.
Yeah.
First of all, the idea that practice makes perfect. We've all said it, we've all heard it, it's been said to us, but it's actually not true. Okay. It just can't be. And to me, that's a phrase that we just need to eliminate. And with these kids, maybe getting them to talk about what practice does. Practice makes what? What happens when you practice? Or practice prevents. Um, one, my favorite one that I always use is practice prevents panic, because when you're going to perform, you've got those butterflies going anyway. And this can be any kind of performance, giving a speech in class. It doesn't have to be playing on a stage in front of a large audience. But if you've practiced and if you've prepared, it prevents panic. So these are
Practice makes better.
it practice makes better, practice makes possible. I mean,
Uh-huh.
and kids will come up with some really interesting things if you ask this of them. I mean, this could be just a warm-up exercise in a class one day, you know um and just getting kids to talk and do more of that kind of thing, about to keep it at so it's not a strange conversation you might end up having with a student. This could be a beginning of the year um, little talk that you all have, a discussion you have in class. So, but I like Yo-Yo Ma. Perfection is not very communicative. Um, and I wish I knew where I heard this or read it, but he talks about being in a performance, playing one of the cello suites. And he was, while he was performing, what was going through his mind is, well, this is kind of boring. Yeah, I'm playing everything right, but what am I doing? I mean, does the audience really, are they getting anything out of this?
Mm.
And so he changed his method of communicating with people because of this inner conversation he had in the middle of a performance of one of the Bach suites for unaccompanied cello. So he's like, sharing is a much better way to communicate than proving that you know all the right notes, that you can do it absolutely correctly. You want to share. You know, uh, Beethoven said um, that to play a wrong note is insignificant. To play it without passion is inexcusable. So it's the
Yeah,
idea of expressing what you know and what you are trying to say to your audience.
yeah,
And and that's what kids need to be able to do. They need to be able to express to their audience, whether it's writing a paper, giving a speech, or playing for somebody. They need to communicate their their passion for this, their love of doing it. Um,
and to share that and
and share
to create an
that's
experience in the audience, that's a shared experience.
exactly.
And that's what I love about what Yo-Yo Ma is saying here.
Hmm.
It isn't about doing it perfectly. It's about sharing this experience in such a way that other people are enriched by it, as you are.
Yeah. What
Yeah.
I, what I always tell my students before they've got a competition or a performance or something, I say, you're giving a gift to the audience.
Hmm.
And think of it that way. Don't think of
Hmm.
it as, it has to be perfectly wrapped and the bow's tied perfectly. No, you're giving them a gift, something from yourself, from inside. And you're sharing something with them and you want to draw them into what you're doing. So,
Yeah.
okay, just do your best. A physical impossibility for a perfectionist. Um, and
And this raises a whole issue about approaching perfectionism. This is something I talk about in the paper that was referenced before. But when you suggest to a perfectionistic person something that they ought to be doing differently, the first thing that they're going to think is, I haven't been good enough to please this
Mhm,
particular person.
mhm,
So saying just do your best is like saying, don't worry about it. You're not really capable of doing much better than this. Just do the best you can, and it'll be okay.
mhm,
Um, it is we have to understand that the way we approach a person who is perfectionistic has to be understood from the point of view of their experience of what we're saying,
mhm.
not from what we believe is the right way to do something.
Yeah, yeah. And if you do want to give instruction, make sure that it's specific. That way you're not putting putting down anything that they've done. Tell
Hmm.
them what's good and then tell them specifically how they can improve it. And it's a hard thing. I'll ask my students after they play for me, I'll say, okay, what went right? They have a really hard time doing that. I mean, after they've been with me for for a while, they start to learn, okay, well, I did this, this was okay, and this was okay. Now, how can we make it better? And why do we need to make it better? Or do we need to make it better? What needs to be done? So it's helping them do some of that metacognitive thinking. And that goes to this, do you believe it will work? Because it until the student actually believes that these changes are going to work, it it's not going to work.
Let
They
me
have
just
to.
add one thing to that.
Mhm.
If you're talking to them about ways that it might improve or get better, ask them what it feels like to them to have you suggest that. When I
Mhm.
say this could be done a little bit better here, what does that feel like when you hear me say that? When you hear me ask you to do that? Again, that may get you into what's actually going on here, that pushes this student to want to be perfect.
Right. Okay. So this is just a teaser to another session that we're going to be doing later in the year where we get some feedback from students. And this is something that these are from some of my students over the years, um, kind of what they think is good about being a perfectionist or bad about being a perfectionist. And it's very enlightening to see what they think. And um, there are other questions that I've asked them. This was just, like I said, this is just a little bit of a teaser, because we are going to give you some more of this in a session later on in the school year, um, from a lot of different types of students and age ranges and things like this. So this is the way it's set up is, so 13, that's the age of the person's in 7th grade and a female. So that's what those original numbers are about. I love I get stuff done right, but it takes forever to get it done right. That's yeah. Um, Also, you think you're perfect, you can't do anything wrong, but you think you're good at stuff at the first try. Therefore, if I don't do it well the first try, then obviously I'm no good. I'm a fake. I'm a failure. I'm an imposter. So all of these things, I think you can see. If I don't do if sometimes I don't do things if I know I will fail. That there was a lot, and this is a senior in high school that's saying this. And so as I said, I work there's something in our DNA, us oboists. And But I do a lot of work with them on these types of the way they're perceiving themselves and the way they're perceiving um, judgments of others, and learning how to fail and have it be a positive experience, a learning experience, maybe not positive, but a learning experience, because it's part of a process. Process is one of my favorite words. Process and relationships, those two things, once they understand the relationships between some of these things, they can see how the process is moving forward for them, and they can cut themselves some slack along the way.
Just one
That's
more comment about the 13-year-old young woman. It's really interesting because she says that her perfectionism is helpful, and then she says it's not always good. It doesn't always work out that way. This is the person who I would have a conversation about with, just to say that when you're excelling at things, from academics to sports to music and everything, it isn't your perfectionism that's allowing you to be successful. It is your talent, your energy, and your commitment. Um, and sometimes the ability to understand that and grasp that it's not really the perfectionism. You actually can let go of that. And if anything, it may help you to be more successful. So it's an interesting point, just the first comment there.
Yeah. I believe that's all we have, and we went much longer than 15 minutes, Tom.
Yeah, sorry about that. There was a question.
Let's see.
Yeah. Yes. The question is perfectionism and imposter syndrome linked?
Oh, it
Depends.
can be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, uh, yeah, yes and no. Just like procrastination and perfectionism can be linked, but are not necessarily. Not everybody who feels the imposter syndrome is perfectionistic. Sometimes they're just thinking that they are not. They're going to be found out not to be the person that they think that they are, or the person they're trying to come across as being. And in other cases, they can be linked because if you're a perfectionistic person and you end up feeling like you're not being good enough, then you may conclude that you're just fooling yourself into thinking that you ever could be good enough. And so that's the imposter syndrome. So sometimes yes, and sometimes no.
Mhm. Okay, I know there's another question about was an intensity between male perfectionists and female perfectionists, something about that.
I didn't.
Yeah, do you find a difference in the intensity between male and female
Oh,
perfectionists?
I haven't necessarily.
I haven't either.
Yeah. I mean, it depends on circumstances. That's what we're going to see later on. It depends on the context in which the person is being a student or whatever phase of life they're at. So different things affect males and females in different ways. But in terms of the intensity of perfectionism, I don't think there's any research that's ever shown that males are more or less intense than females along those lines.
There are some other questions. I can keep reading them if you'd like.
Yep. Yeah, go ahead.
Is perfectionism more common with twice exceptional students?
I don't know that there's any research that shows that. I may be wrong about that, but I mean, you can think of reasons why twice exceptional students might be perfectionistic, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're more likely to be perfectionistic than other students. So,
yeah, I'm not aware of any research about that either. But maybe somebody could do some.
Another question is, any specific advice for kids that do the erasing and rewriting and erasing until they have holes in their paper?
my first approach to that, and I get this question a lot when I'm doing presentations about this. I would have you, whether you're a teacher or a parent or whoever, sit down with the child and say, I've noticed something about you. I've noticed that when you go to start a project or something, you erase and you throw the thing away and you try it again and you erase again, so on and so forth. Can you tell me what it is that goes through your mind when you're doing that? I'd be really interested in knowing it seems like a struggle. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but it seems like a struggle to me. Does it seem that way to you? Are you asking yourself questions about whether this is good enough? Are you angry about this? Are you sad about it? Can you tell me something about what it's like for you when you're sitting there erasing these things? And to me, this is what starts an extremely important dialogue, which can ultimately be helpful for kids in overcoming, getting beyond perfectionism.
And it's important to see that as like a warning sign, if you will, or a signal that you may want to take, have one of these conversations with these kids, with this child. It's not that they're just sloppy, or they don't know how to do something. There's something else going on.
And for heaven's sakes, don't say to them, stop being so hard on yourself.
Yes.
That's going to
Like
send
telling
the
them to do
shame
their
through the
best.
roof.
Related to that, if perfectionism has connections to shame, as educators, how do we best address the shame students may feel?
Um, this is a huge question, unfortunately. So we don't have time to get into the answer. I'm hoping, and maybe people who are attending this evening know that I'm going to be doing a session in September based on a paper that I've written in which I explain all of that. I give my point of view about an approach to dealing with this kind of shame. Um, if I had to put this into a brief statement, basically, what you're hoping to do is to help that particular student understand that they are acceptable as they are, and there are particular ways of doing that, and it's important to know that there's no magical fix here. This is not something you can be able to say to them on one occasion and have everything change. This basically is a way of developing a different kind of relationship with a particular student, so that first of all they feel valued by you, so that they feel valued as a human being as a result of that, and you build from there. I talk much more about that in the paper that I've written. You're welcome to see that. I think there's a link to that. If there isn't in this seminar, there is in the Social Emotional Development Network. But that's something I talk about at length.
And I think with a lot of these small subtopics we've been talking about, a lot of it is just using the words so that the students are not surprised by them. So and talking with maybe the whole class about, you know, who in here is going to make a mistake this year, and everybody raises their hand, and who in here, so make it a very natural and a normal thing that if you're learning something, you should be making mistakes. If you're learning something, and that making mistakes doesn't mean you have to be ashamed of yourself. And just putting those words out there sometimes can make a really big difference for these kids, because they keep it, like Tom was saying, it's their inside world. They're keeping it all inside, and they may not even know exactly what's going on inside of them, but they just have this anxiety, and this feeling of panic. And so I personally, I found that to be very helpful, to just make sure the words are out there and you're talking about it and you're normalizing it.
There's one more question. What are some things parents should talk about with schools to help their student?
Talk about with schools.
Yes.
Yeah. This is a tough one. I mean, I remember having to do this with my daughter and some of her teachers, and some of her teachers were great about it, and some of them were not. They just didn't get it. So I would say make sure to that you understand what's going on with your child, and so that you can go in there and talk knowledgeably. So it may mean that you have to do some reading, you have to do listening to some, podcasts or something, so that you understand where what some of these things are. So as you explain it to the teacher, you can say, these are the things, and this is how it's manifesting in my child. And we need to come up with a way to work together to help them overcome this. Like I said, in some situations, the teachers were great. They listened to me, they heard me, and they started doing some learning on their own more about the topic. And in other cases, they didn't, and that unfortunately is going to depend on the teacher. But the more information you can provide them, even if it's just you hand them something about the particular thing that you're seeing, you hand them a little article. I mean, not a big research paper, but something small and to the point, that shows what you're talking about. That will be very helpful for the teacher, because teachers don't know about this stuff. We're not taught about it.
You touched on another really important point here, is not to get into our own perfectionism. As you said, some teachers will hear that and some will not. Don't put yourself down if you're
Right.
not able to make this particular teacher understand, because sometimes they won't. And that's unfortunate and it's sad. We wish it was different, but that is the world that we live in.
Yeah.
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 Wonderful. There's no other
Okay.
questions.
Okay.
If no one else has any other things, then I think we can call it for the night.
Okay.
Thanks to
So,
all of you for
thank
coming
you.
and for attending. And I hope you'll stick around for the rest of our series over
Yeah.
the coming year.
Yeah. They will touch on, student perspectives of it, educational, teachers' perspectives, parental perspectives. Those are some of the things that we've talked about. So be looking for information about those things, and tell your friends and neighbors to join the conversation. Thank you for
Thank you so
attending.
much. Yes, thank you.
Thank you.